So people are still joining. We need to give it a little bit of time. But whilst we're doing that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Chris Henderson. I'm Head of Agriculture in Practical Action. And I was leading the adaptation technology theme in CBA 14. That's community-based adaptation. It was the 14th annual meeting of that community of practice. And it was based on that we were invited to run this session here at the Development and Climate Days and the Understanding Risk Forum. I'll just give it couple more minutes because I think people are still joining, and then we will begin. So this is when probably I feel we should have had a Mentimeter to get some reactions and feedback from you all. So sorry about that, didn't sort that out, but we have got a chat box and you can chat to everybody in the chat box. And one of the key things we want to learn from people who are joining and participating in this session is how you've also used adaptation technologies to deliver climate action and what you think the potential of adaptation technologies are. I know that technology is seen as one of the means of implementation of the Paris Agreement. It's the implementation, it's the doing. And technology is something that often excites people, gives them a buzz. It gives them something tangible to think about implementation. If we talk about implementing climate actions, and we think about the technologies, then it can motivate and inspire a lot of people, which is why community-based adaptation, the Community-Based Adaptation Conference and people who've been involved in that and sharing experiences actually have used it also as a means of improving uptake of action at community levels. So I see Robert has introduced himself in the chat, and I support his invitation as for others to also introduce themselves. We will start. It is 5 past now, so let's start. People may be joining us as we proceed with this session. So a little bit of housekeeping first. So we are recording this meeting, and parts of it may be made available on our website at a later date. We are trying to prevent Zoom bombing, so if you are sharing links with social media and messages on social media, please don't put in the Zoom link. If you notice anything, please inform the host. The host here is World Bank, or it's myself or World Bank 7. World Bank 7 is Joe, and he can also help us technically manage the meeting. And lastly, for best experience, please close non-essential applications. There's a summary sort of slide on how you can use, if you're not used to Zoom, how you can use your computer to interact, either through the chat, with the reactions, and when we come to the plenary sessions, actually join through discussion by unmuting. Great to see people introducing themselves. This is an interactive session. Basically, this discussion started in September in the Community-Based Adaptation Conference. We see this meeting in Development and Climate Days as a continuation of that discussion. In CBA, you could say is largely between practitioners. So you could say it's horizontal learning to develop the narrative on how adaptation technologies work in community-based adaptation. What we're hoping to have from this, after the Ignite presentations and a discussion, is to draw some conclusions that come from this discussion that we can take forward to and take forward to other international and national discussions on how you deliver climate action. So we will be looking for takeaways from this session. There's 30 minutes or so where we're sort of sharing and inspiring ideas amongst participants. Then there'll be 30 minutes where we hear from you. And you will be able to share how you engage with adaptation technologies, what your aspirations and hopes are for adaptation technologies to deliver climate action, and how we might help governments and policymakers and programmers use technologies to improve climate action at a national level. Then there'll be reporting back highlights from each of those breakout rooms. There'll be up to 7 breakout rooms. You'll be assigned to a breakout room, you'll be in that breakout room, you'll have that discussion. Success will be an interactive discussion in the breakout room. Then there'll be the reporting back and then reflections from our speakers based on how this session went. So the objective, as I probably already explained, is, as in the title, to show how adaptation technologies can improve climate action. The adaptation is one of the areas where actually there's been woefully poor implementation, you could say. Mitigation has attracted a lot of investment. Mitigation has been something that a lot has been done on monitoring and reporting and setting targets, and it has involved heavily the private sector. Adaptation is lagging behind. The question is, can adaptation technologies be used to address that lag in implementation? The Paris Agreement said guidelines were 50-50 in investment would go for adaptation and mitigation. The tracking shows it hasn't achieved anywhere near that amount. But if adaptation technologies can work, and if they can work in developing countries and can work for communities, then actually implementation can be greatly improved and upscaled. One of the things we've been talking about, and I think the Ignite presentations will show, is that there is the need to make a business case for investing public funds for international commitments, donor funds, and public funds to create the enabling environment for adaptation technologies. There's much work needs to be done in developing the financial case so that individuals, enterprises, and the private sector generally can invest in adaptation. We need their engagement. And then there's a lot that can be done on improving bottom-up innovation, grassroots innovation and action. And we'll have an inspiring presentation on that. And maybe that will trigger some ideas that you may want to discuss. These are the Ignite presentations we're going to be having. So firstly, we'll have Maria Claudia from Practical Action Peru talking about coffee agroforestry, how that delivers actually adaptation for the people who are growing coffee, but mitigation as well. And for the government of Peru, that is very important. Coffee agroforestry is part of their NAMA. We'll be talking about something outside of agriculture, which is biodikes and ways of protecting communities from floods in Nepal. Darren will share that example with us. We'll have an example or two coming from India, Bangladesh, and I think there was one from Peru, from Aditya, talking about innovation, bottom-up innovation by communities and how that can be very effective. We'll have an example from Vietnam where CARE have been working with a program to use climate information systems to help farmers adapt to climate change. And they'll be talking about the challenges they faced when they tried when their program was delivering that through a private sector business model. That's really interesting, because very rarely do we talk about the challenges and learning from failure. We talk usually only about success. So there's a lot to be learned there, and I find that very inspiring. And then we'll have a presentation. Actually, it will be by Harrison, not Maria. We'll be talking about solar powered irrigation in Zimbabwe, where Practical Action have a lot of experience of that. So I hope that is clear. And with this, I hope Maria Claudia is here among the participants. I'd like to invite Maria to unmute and talk us through this 5-minute Ignite presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Here I am.
Just next when you want the next slide.
Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. I am going to be presenting the agroforestry multistrata system developed by Practical Action and our experience based here in Peru. Next slide, please. Well, to start this presentation, let me introduce you to what a traditional coffee field looks like in Peru. In the image in the left, you can see a monocrop or a system with only coffee plants. In a business as usual scenario, farmers have a poor use of technology and their farms are highly vulnerable to landslides, which led to erosion of the land. Actually, in this image in the left, you can see a landslide process, which finally led to a completely crop loss. This erosion decreases productivity and the quality of coffee, and in the case of landslide, it can imply the complete loss of the farm. This forces producers to migrate into the forest looking for new productive areas, and this associates coffee production with high rates of deforestation. In the other hand, in a business as usual scenario, we have the people who depend on the coffee, which are the farmers. Farmers have their own struggles associated with poor education, limited access to credit, lack of land tenure rights, and others that limit their development and quality of life. And if this was not enough, coffee is one of the agricultural sector most vulnerable to climate change. Climate change is causing the loss of natural suitability for coffee cultivation in productive areas, and this combined with the situation of poverty and precariousness of producers will lead to unprecedented environmental, social, and economic impacts through the coffee value chain and on those directly involved, especially the farmers. So what can we do in this scenario of vulnerability? A shift to multistrata agroforestry system, or SAM by its acronym in Spanish. This adaptation technology is based on a combination of trees, arbustive and herbaceous species that form several layers of vegetative cover on the ground that protects from the soil from erosion and nourish the soil. As you can see in the image on the right, it is a system that combines the coffee plants, which are the little ones, and the trees that are growing and giving shadow to the coffee plants. This introduction of trees and other vegetative species combined with agroecology technologies, such as the production of biofertilizers, make producers more resilient to the impact of climate change, reducing the incidence of plague and diseases and increasing productivity and quality of coffee. This helps people adapt to climate change, but also is a pretty rich mitigation technology since it reduces the use of chemical products and the introduction of trees captures carbon. As I have said before, it also reduces emission by avoided deforestation. Next slide, please. You can see in this slide the map of Peru, in which the red zones represents coffee area. And as you can see, this is not an isolated problem. It's a problem as large as 2,000 kilometers of Peru distance from north to south. And this area not only represents coffee production in volume, it also represents all the people that depend on coffee for living. So thinking in the people and in the problem they face and having this adaptation technology that works, that is a win-win solution for producers and the environment, we found it necessary to influence the government to look for scalability. Actually, the development and the benefit of this agroforestry model led us to include agroforestry as a concept and approach in the Peruvian forestry law in 2011 and in one of the 4 regulations in 2015. This led to the inclusion of agroforestry as a mitigation adaptation measure in the Peruvian NDC and in the draft of our National Adaptation Plan. We still have work to accomplish success in the scalability of the technology, such as decentralizing capacities, which are mainly in Lima, the capital of Peru, developing tools and policies at a local level for technical and financial resources, develop partnership with the private sector. But as you can see, here in Peru, we have embedded agroforestry within our national policies, which is a huge step to transform an adaptation technology that works into climate action. So I think that's everything I have to say. Thank you so much. And I'll get back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Maria Claudia. I mean, when you look at that map and you look at the population involved, I mean, if coffee agroforestry can be scaled, it could
Yes.
make a significant difference to both adaptation and mitigation, to people's
Yes.
livelihoods. I think we need to be thinking big, don't we? We need to be having serious ambition about the type of change we need. So thank you, Maria, for doing that.
Thank you, Chris.
The next Ignite presentation is from Nepal, and I'd like to invite Dharam to unmute and share with us your Ignite.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just talking about the climate technology that has been in use since last couple of years in an area that is highly, exposed to flood risk. Being Nepal, one of the climate vulnerable country, hydromet hazards and connected hazards that turning into disaster in every year because of the monsoon and because of the changing climate conditions. So if you just turn the next. As I mentioned, Nepal, one of the climate vulnerable countries. Every year, about 100 lives lost because of the flood and landslide. So changing river course, river channels, because of the context of the country, because of the landscape that upstream, downstream, and the flatland people actually affected by the severity of the flood. So next, to address these adversities that actually resulted from the changing climatic patterns, the practical action that has been working in the flood prone area of Karnali, the one of the largest river of Nepal, we have introduced a biodike. The name itself sufficient to introduce the technology. Bio is kind of biological material like plant or green infrastructure, dike the fence. So making up infrastructure along with the river in an objective to control flood. So it's a kind of combination of local skills, mixing with engineering skills, use of local technology, use of local materials, and providing a number of co-benefits like social, economic, and environmental benefits by means of a biodike. So this has the ample of opportunity that result after having this after a long time. Like if we build biodike this year, then we could see the ample of opportunities after 2, 3, or 4 years, and over time it becomes resilient. So this is a kind of the technology. That's why what next is being Nepal that has been introducing its policy and practices under the new federal systems. So climate policy 2019, and then We are also formulating nationally determined contributions, embedding like adaptation technologies on it. So there are ample of opportunities to introduce such type of locally adopted, easily transferable and user-friendly technology into the policy, into the practices, and we could upscale being Nepal, exposed to multi-hazard risk and many rivers that comes from Himalayas, making the communities living in downstream at risk. Next. So you see, there are, as I mentioned, the number of rivers that making the riverbank really vulnerable, and when the river channels hit the the bank that are vulnerable to exposed, and then it enter into the settlement and agricultural land. So the river, while enter into the settlement and agricultural land, that actually convert agricultural land into riverways full of sand and stones. That is really devastating in a country or in a community, those who are rely on agriculture for meeting their livelihoods. So there are huge potentiality to upscale this type of technologies to reduce the risk of floods or landslide or hydromet hazards. So the local government, they have their own policies, own plan, and there's ample opportunity to introduce or integrate this type of technologies so that they could allocate resources in their fiscal planning to adapt this technology. Just finally, in a concluding way, biodike, one of the cost-effective, socially, economically, environmental friendly technology that we can upscale to reduce the risk of flood and build flood resilience communities. Thank you. Over to you, Chris. So this is a biodike. It actually built in an initial stage. Over the time, while it gets matured and while plant grows over here, then these plant also give the shelter of the number of flora and fauna. So ecosystem built over there, and then river channel that used to enter into the settlement, into the community, that divert and goes into its own course. So this is a user-friendly, sustainable solutions that local communities has already adopted, and there is a huge potential to upscale. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharam. One of the things that I found difficult when I was first looking at pictures of biodikes is it seemed to be that we were looking at pictures of dense vegetation, and you say to yourself, well, where's the river? Well, in fact, the river's the other side of this dense vegetation, which actually helps train and manage the river so that there's no flooding. So the biodike is actually part of a whole sort of a natural system using natural resources to control rivers. And it's great because when you think about it, it's something that communities help plan, communities help design. They know, they have their local knowledge to be able to know where it's going to work, where it's not going to work. But the problem is, without public money and support from public investment or climate funds or something like this, it's very hard to get that implemented at scale to make a difference. And sometimes the contracts with concrete and cement and physical infrastructures, which can be managed through procurement systems, are more attractive. So here's an alternative that works, driven by communities. Really food for thought. Thank you, Dharam.
Thank you.
So the next is we need to think about innovation. And I think Aditya is going to do that. So Aditya, I invite you to share your 5 minutes Ignite on bottom-up innovation.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak this afternoon. Yes, today I'm going to, unlike the other two speakers, I'm not going to be talking about a specific product or a technology. I'm going to be talking about a more model more about a model for innovation for developing new technologies for becoming more resilient. So if I can go on to the first slide, the idea here is fairly simple, that there are existing models of bottom-up and frugal innovation that already exists. Jugaad innovation, which has now become an established approach to innovating and is used by big corporations like 3M, actually comes from a Hindi Punjabi word, and anyone who lives in our part of the world in South Asia knows what it means. It means temporary hacks to find quick solutions to problems. Now, this model of innovation has been has been looked at very seriously as a way to enhancing adaptation and building resilience, and it really has 5 key principles. Chris, if I can see if you can click once. Uh, Autonomous innovations have 5 pillars. One is that they are indigenous, that is, they are calibrated with local cultures. They are inductive, that is, unlike other innovations that are top-down driven by experts, these emerge from the bottom. They are intuitive, they are informed by the lived reality of people who are battling risk, and they're iterative. They emanate from rapid cycles of experimentation and trialing. And all this is only possible because these innovations are inexpensive. So that's enough about the technical guff about what these are, what the principles are. Let me give you 3 clear examples of autonomous innovations for enhancing resilience so you know what I'm talking about on the next slide. The first example comes from Bangladesh. I traveled to Bangladesh to communities outside Dhaka that have historically always suffered from flooding. But more recently, the patterns of flooding are changing and floods are becoming more intense, leading to massive disruption to their lives and livelihoods. More specifically, their access to basic services is being cut off, and within this, they are unable to access fresh and clean drinking water when these floods happen, because either pipe water there's salt water, there's stormwater intrusion in piped water, or hand pumps are inaccessible. And therefore, to solve this problem, these communities have used the clay available by these riverbanks to fashion these portable stoves called the Matir Unun. What this allows them to do is essentially boil water during flood time so they can access drinking water then. Now, this sounds like a very simple innovation, but it's actually has a dramatic impact on the health profile of these communities and the resilience to flooding. It's cheap, it's indigenous, it's really a bottom-up model of innovation. The second example comes from India, from the province of Chhattisgarh, which is in central India, that has been experiencing the twin problems of increasing heat waves and increasing blackouts and electricity shortages. So a local innovator bought second-hand motorcycle batteries and rigged it up to 2 cheap Chinese-made solar panels to develop a poor person's backup generator. What this essentially does is, when there is electricity, the battery gets charged, and when there's blackout, the battery comes online and can run a fan and a light bulb. In this way, hundreds and thousands of poor people across Chhattisgarh are able to access potentially life-saving impacts of small amounts of power when there are blackouts. Now, the innovator didn't just stop at building this new invention. He also initiated a grassroots process of manufacturing where women's self-help groups in the rural areas outside the big towns in Chhattisgarh have been engaged in manufacturing this. The third example actually comes from Peru and was led by Practical Action, um, and really entails agricultural innovation, and specifically pockets of isolated communities high in the Andes were experiencing extremely low temperatures, lower than usual historic patterns, seasonal patterns, which was leading to chaos and disruption of food supply routes and leading to incidences of food insecurity. And therefore, Practical Action with local farmers unearthed extinct ancient varieties of potatoes that used to grow in the Andes that could withstand up to minus 40 degrees centigrade temperature. And through this, they helped train farmers who trained other farmers to popularize this indigenous potato variety that was resilient to the impacts of extreme temperature. So these are 3 key examples of what autonomous innovations are. And on the next slide, Chris, I feel that they're particularly relevant for this model of innovation is particularly relevant for enhancing resilience for a number of reasons. One is that you can put in all the planning mechanisms and infrastructure and everything you want to do to reduce risk due to the uncertainty of the impacts of climate change and how they interact with a range of other stressors. There'll still be a degree of uncertainty left. And that residual risk will have to be shouldered by poor and vulnerable communities that will have to innovate to deal with exigent situations. This helps do that. Um, and also helps bring a number of principles of resilience to life. To give you one example, networking and de-networking is mentioned across the literature as an important principle of resilience. And these autonomous innovations help do that. Both the stove and the generator allow communities to link in with larger water provision or electricity networks when things are fine, and allow them to detach from them when things are not fine, giving them a critical resilience capacity to deal with perturbation and risk. Also, interestingly, autonomous innovation is everywhere during COVID-19, from the manner in which vaccines have been developed, where multiple different iterations have taken place of different and have been tested and trialed in rapid cycles, and regulatory protocols have been abridged, to proposals for social distancing on aircraft by reversing the middle seat. All these are kind of emblematic of this Jugaad autonomous model of innovation that is quick and iterative and bottom up. The final slide really tries to answer the question that this session asks. On the next slide, Chris, thank you. Um, and I think there are a number of ways in which autonomous innovation can really feed into national policy. One is, let's remember that countries across the world countries and organizations across the world have signed up to many charters of doing development well, like doing development differently, the doing development differently charter, or the building back better charter. And autonomous innovation aligns intrinsically with these existing charters. So we're not asking them to do something that is totally different. This helps them do what they've already signed up to. The second is that there are existing networks of grassroots innovators. For instance, in India, there's the Honeybee network, which links innovators such as these with each other to share knowledge and information and network with each other. Governments and their policies and non-governmental organizations can support these existing networks. Also, challenge funds, where particular pots of money are made available exclusively to unearth autonomous innovations through a competition mode, can help enable and mainstream autonomous innovation and make it more salient for dealing with risk. And finally, if there are existing resilience building programs, it is crucially important that those delivering these programs understand that they should recognize, mainstream, and embrace autonomous innovations that are enabling resilience at the local level, as opposed to sidelining them for top-down expert-led solutions. Chris, back to you.
Thank you, Aditya. I really like that. I love the examples. They really sort of brought the idea of autonomous innovation, or just innovation coming from people and from communities, making a difference, being timely, and not having to go through these very long processes of proof and formalization, but actually running with what works. I think that could be a very powerful concept. Thank you for challenging us with that. Let's hear our fourth Ignite now. By the way, I should say, we will allow opportunities for clarifications if you need them before we go into breakout groups, should there be something that you're not clear on, but you can succinctly ask and we can clarify before we go into the breakout groups. But let's, in the meantime, hear from Nya. Nya, if you unmute. Thank you.
Next slide, please, Chris. Yeah, so good evening from Vietnam. I am Nga and I work for CARE International in Vietnam. My pleasure today to share with you all about our fail forward experience with our weather. What I'm sharing might be helpful for those who are developing business cases or financing models to scale up adaptation technologies. particularly climate information services. Next, please. Allo Weather is an initiative that aims to develop a climate risk reduction fee-for-service model where poor farmers, particularly women farmers, will pay for weather forecast and advisory transmitted through interactive SMS and voice messages. The forecasts and advisories are supposed to be locally relevant, accessible, and actionable. And based on the success of some climate information service projects that CARE implemented in Vietnam, we had a bold ambition that Allo Weather will do development differently. We would be able to extend our reach. We can create more impact on the lives of poor rural farmers. But the question is that whether it is viable to turn a successful development project into a business model. Have we taken into account all factors to make it work? Next, please. So we actually had 1 year from August 2018 to September 2019 to explore, test, and validate the Allo Weather model. We aim to reach 4,000 people in one province first before expanding to other locations. But the pilot was not rosy as we had anticipated. First, as we move from paper-based and other traditional ways to disseminate climate information to SMS and voice messages, the cost went up. Our initial promise was just 18 cents per message, but then the actual final cost were 95 cents. Second, our customers, who are mainly poor rural farmers, are not willing to pay. They are only able to pay around 22 to 43 cents per message, and that is less than half of the actual cost. And third, given people's unwillingness to pay and the complexity of the business model, which involves so many stakeholders, we could not scale our work. As we initially targeted 4,000 farmers, in the pilot, we only able to reach 1,700 people. The fourth, as we transmitted the advisories in the SMS format, the content doesn't appear to be legible because it lacks the tones that we often see in the Vietnamese language. And last but not least, we didn't see the interest from any private sector partners to invest in this model. We actually had to pay fee to mobile network operator to disseminate climate information. And they said that the project is not commercially viable and they can't invest in it. Next, please. And yeah, the situation brought up to a very intriguing question. What should be the best financing model to scale up climate information service and support adaptation technologies? And yeah, clearly that in the context of Vietnam and our Allo Weather business model, we found that the funding from NGO is not enough. We need public funding to support to scale up this good work. A public-private partnership might be an option given that many private companies might need the government to support and share the risk as they make investment in this area. In other contexts, it could be private funding alone. I know that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So you need to work out in advance how you define the best financing model for your project and program forward. So the biggest question is that what should be the best financing model, the business case for adaptation technologies. And I would like to open that question for further discussion in the breakout groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Nya. I love the title, Fail Forward. Just highlighting, you did a pilot. We always hear of pilots. There's always an assumption that the pilot will lead to replication and upscaling. But as you say, not as rosy as expected, but valuable nonetheless. And what struck me from this is understanding the customers, understanding what the customers actually can pay, but also understanding that this is a public good, something that could really change agricultural, the success of agricultural smallholder farmers. So there is a business case to be made, and maybe learning from projects like Alla Weather to give some of the data. At that point now, we come to our last Ignite. It is going to be from Harrison, who is representing Maria. And Harrison is part of our agriculture team in Zimbabwe. So Harrison, if you would like to unmute your mic, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name is Harrison. I work for Practical Action in Zimbabwe. Thanks for the introduction. Next slide, please, Chris. So today I'll be talking about, next slide again, please. Thank you. So today I'll be talking about solar powered irrigation and how we think this technology can be a game changer for rural and remote communities, but looking further into how we can ensure adequate investment so that remote communities can have access to this technology. Next slide, please. So as Practical Action, we've experimented with different kinds of models of solar powered irrigation, and these range from single standalone systems for small pieces of land to mini grids and even mega solar farms. And what we've learned from those experiences is that solar powered irrigation is a technology that has great potential to transform rural livelihoods, and farmers are really keen on utilizing the power of the sun to improve their livelihoods. But the biggest challenge is that they don't have adequate finance to invest in such technologies. And the questions that we have is how can we get more investors confident in this technology, as well as guaranteeing that smallholder farmers can really operate and manage and maintain this technology and utilize it for long-term viability. So we have learned that while this technology really works, there's still need for more work to be done in terms of developing the business case so that we have more strategic investment from a development perspective. This can come in different forms, and we hope that through the dialogue we will have today, we can be able to know about different innovative approaches to make development finance more strategic to help communities to access these technologies. We've also learned that there's still more work that needs to be done in terms of the business models for the financial viability of this technology among smallholder farmers. So we really need to get different service providers involved, different equipment manufacturers involved, so that we get a picture of the most financially viable way of having this technology work for smallholder farmers. So I'll leave the presentation there and hope to learn more from the breakout sessions. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Harrison. Thank you for stepping up for Maria. And you also left us there with the question, what can be done to attract more private sector investment and enable scale up? And that is the question. At this point in time, before we actually go to the breakout rooms, is there a question that anybody would like to pose to any of the 5 presenters for clarification to understand specifically their Ignite example? If not, what I'm going to say is actually to introduce these breakout rooms. We haven't got a lot of participation in this session, but the process is really, it still can be useful if we can have a meaningful discussion. We could have 2 rooms, and in those 2 rooms, we could have a discussion that looks into this, this challenge that's just been presented, is that, you know, can we make a better business case for investing in public funds? Can we make better financial case for when it's private sector investment or personal investment? Smallholder farmers are, after all, private sector actors, and they make a big commitment themselves when they adopt a technology or use a technology. And then this whole idea of, you know, innovation and autonomous innovation and innovation that comes from the situations people find themselves in, and how we link that with how technology is being used to deliver climate action. We have these 3 questions. Unless I see a hand up from the participants, or if someone doesn't unmute and interrupt me for a clarification from one of the 5 Ignite presenters, I will suggest that we actually go into the breakout rooms in a moment. I don't see anybody.
Hi, hello, Chris. Robert here.
Hello, Robert. Yes, okay.
Sorry, I could not find the hand function. I have a question for Aditya from IIED. Aditya, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I found it really interesting, and the whole concept. And I really like how you put together all these different existing approaches, such as, you know, the all-day conversation about bottom-up innovation. So I was wondering, based on your work and experiences in these 3 case studies, what do you think are currently main challenges for taking this type of decentralized small-scale innovations to scale?
Sure, what a great question. The biggest challenge is the lack of recognition that they can actually make a big difference in formal resilience building processes. And that is a function of sort of epistemology and worldview, where there is a dominance of expert-led approaches. And innovation is very much follows the Eurocentric Six Sigma approach to innovation, where we arrive at the best possible solution as opposed to a solution that might be good enough. So I think one is this more amorphous challenge with regard to worldview and epistemology. I think there are a range of other more practical challenges. For instance, yes, autonomous innovation is frugal and inexpensive, but creating an ecosystem of autonomous innovators requires systematic and long-term investment. For instance, IDEO and the Rockefeller Foundation and others have tried to do this by systematically holding challenge funds on particular topics around resilience to elicit autonomous innovators to provide solutions. I think we need that kind of an approach at a larger scale. I also think that there are policy-related issues that exist in different countries. For instance, in many countries, there is a bar on people dabbling in certain kinds of technologies and engaging with certain kinds of materials in order to innovate for safety reasons and for for national security reasons. There needs to be a review of those protocols to see the degree to which they're actually serving the purpose that they're meant for, or the degree to which they're actually inhibiting innovators from finding solutions to everyday problems. And of course, then there are political economic reasons, that there are big entrenched interests in making sure that innovation is not diffused and that we continue to rely on certain companies, certain government departments, certain organizations to provide the solutions that they do. So questioning the hegemony of the established players that have dominated particular landscapes is part of the issue as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Aditya. If there's no further questions, I'm going to say we're going to break into 2 groups. We honestly have it is actually a very small attendance, but the process that we are going through here, having this discussion, is still really valuable. And I think if we have these smaller groups of people, everyone gets an opportunity to speak and say what they think, then I think that that could be valuable. And then we'll come back together and look at what our reflections on this discussion and session are. So Joe, if you can put us into the two groups, and Robert, I think you'll be chairing one group, I'll be chairing the other. We will both record our respective groups and we'll come back in 25 minutes, something like that. Joe, I'll send you a message when we come back. Know everyone else on the call at the moment. I'm hoping we're going to have 8 or 9 people, but let's see. There may be a couple more coming. We'll give them a minute or two to enter the room. But otherwise, let's just briefly go round and introduce ourselves to this group and the discussion we're going to have. I will reshare my screen then as well. Oh, I've got to press the record button. Oh, it is recording already. So, well, as we all know, I'm Chris Henderson, Head of Practical Agriculture and Practical Action. Very much, but I'm a big stakeholder in whether
Harrison.
Thanks, Robert. I'm Harrison Manyuma, working practical action, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. This moment for the past 3 or 4 years is mainly been in agriculture and energy, but we're starting to go into DRR as well. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And Vico, I've seen. Oh, so can you speak? I'm not sure from the answer.
I don't think so.
Okay, but I do see there is a question. There is a question here, so that's great. So we have I mean we can start with these 3 questions that were posed by Chris.
communities, you do need to be able to communicate really well with them, and we need to know what resonates. It was that actually, I think, got the concept of adaptation technology, gave it some traction, because people
bankability or coordination. Okay, so who wants to start sharing some thoughts?
I could share a couple of quick thoughts on Vico's very interesting and relevant question. So I think, yes, there's a lot of thinking around this theme, because IIED is pushing for greater localization of risk reduction and adaptation initiatives. And so this question comes up automatically. But the more local you go, the more disaggregated you becomes difficult to manage. So I think there are a few ways around it. One is the development of local institutions that can help channel, lead, report on these funds. There are some examples of what these might look like. One good one comes from Kenya, where Kenya, through legislation, has established county-level climate funds. And there is now a national level mandate that a certain percentage of all climate finance will go straight to county-level climate funds, who have the capacity to design, deliver, and monitor investments made from these funds. So which then provides an institutional home for a number of disaggregated projects, allowing for this localization to take place. The other approaches, and people like the organizations like the Asian Development Bank are taking this approach, which is you invest in intermediary organizations that then manage a portfolio of large, small projects. For instance, the Asian Development Bank funds banks that give out microloans. So you give whatever, $50 million to an intermediary organization to give out 50,000 more microloans that can then spur innovation at the local level and have the individual level projects there. So there are these different models there. No one's quite solved it, but it is happening.
Thanks a lot, Aditya. Any other thoughts for any of the questions? Harrison, in your presentation, you
thanks, Robert. Yeah, maybe building upon
and what type of flexibilities and adaptation that we would be able to make when we scale up that type of innovation.
Yeah, and I think that what you said about a lot of us, I think, have accepted and used indigenous knowledge a lot. We haven't really thought about the innovation as well as the indigenous knowledge, and that framework, yeah, it could be really good. I think making those examples come to life, maybe a little bit, case studies in a practical sense, might have some leverage.
Yeah.
Do you want to come in and comment on this? What's of the different things you've heard today, which are the ones that I mean, where we were talking particularly about this frugal innovation, or this innovation linking with indigenous knowledge? Do you see?
Sorry, who are you asking?
Comment?
I mean, I'm happy to comment. I think there is an issue of framing, and I think across development we have a lot of different terms for things that quite often mean roughly the same thing. So, we talk about indigenous knowledge, we talk about community-based adaptation technology. I mean, IID is working on a project with HIVOS, which has been going on for several years now, the Energy Change Lab. And we're looking at financing for productive uses of energy. But I just think the connection isn't there. And just like Chris, if you're the head of agriculture, that to me doesn't.
Robert, I'm sorry if I can jump in quickly. I think developing methodologies to understand the costs and benefits, I think, is crucially important. How much does it take to create an enabling environment for bottom-up innovations, local innovations, and what is the dividend that we get from that? And I think work that some of my colleagues like Tom Tanner have done say that this kind of analysis, the cost benefit analysis, or understanding the dividends of investments in these need to be measured in 2 or 3 different ways. One is there's a straight conservative way of making that, investing $100 in X solution or X innovation has led to $4,000 saved as a result of reduced losses from impacts of disasters or climate change. That's a sort of category A type analysis. But I think more evolved analyses that really look at how investments in risk reduction and resilience through the types of innovations we've talked about, through biodikes, for instance, what do they do to the economy of a local area? If you use biodikes, does agriculture become more viable? And does the local economy grow? There have been examples from places like Mexico, where building flood protective infrastructure in the Tabasco region led to a spurt in tourism, because suddenly it was safer to build hotels and restaurants and all that in areas that were previously prone to flood risk. So really looking at the resilience dividend of some of these innovations can make a case for these innovations much clearer. I also want to emphasize that I think we're at a very unique moment in time, right? With COVID-19 and COVID-19 and other risks, like the Red Cross has said, and they found in their analysis that something like 55 million people over the last 9 months have faced storms, droughts, and floods, as well as COVID-19. And I suspect the manner in which most
culture which regenerates natural capital. We should talk about agroforestry is a good one, because you can picture the agroforestry and think of that as a technology. I think the biodikes, so I think maybe it's more say what we mean, don't use the terms. Maybe like this session, maybe the term adaptation technology didn't grab people attending Understanding Risk Forum, because maybe they thought adaptation technologies, doesn't mean, maybe it didn't grab them. Maybe we could have had something more practical that they would have picked up. So I'd suggested about 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes just for this discussion, and then we go back to plenary. We may finish our meeting a little bit earlier, which is okay because we get a lunch break. So I can see Joe is in the room. Joe, shall we, I don't know how it's going in the other group. Can you pop back in the other group and say, are you happy to reconvene in plenary? And
I think they'll be very happy to reconvene at the moment.
Okay, say we'll do that then. So
okay.
Final points from Joseph. I'll just say 1 minute wrap up here, and then we'll go back in then 1 minute's time.
No problem. If you all leave the room, just leave the breakout room and return to the plenary. Thank you.
Okay, I see. So you just walk out. I get it. This is kind of cool. I'm learning the technology, if nothing else. So we got our 3 points.
But it's emblematic of the kind of innovation that's happening around all of us to deal with different kinds of shocks, be it hydrometeorological shocks or economic shocks, and those need to be studied, scaled up.
Yeah, true. I just wanted to add on the point of the media that you mentioned, Robert. So here in Zimbabwe, what we are doing is we are training the media on sustainability issues, working together with some private companies who want to play a part in sustainability issues. So we are training them on sustainability issues so that they understand them better, so that when they write about it, they are more informed and probably focusing more on what we can learn and promoting or upscaling what has worked. So we can also look at the possibilities of doing that.
Thanks, Harrison. Well, I just received the message that we are out to return to the plenary. so we can wrap up. So Alice, Harrison, are you still fine with sharing the main messages?
Yeah, I can give it a go, Robert.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, how do we do that?
So if you just click at the bottom right where it says leave room, but don't leave the entire meeting, just leave the breakout room and you'll return to the plenary.
Thanks a lot.
And right. Okay, so we are back with, I just need to get the chat up, participants and chat. Where on earth is the chat? Sorry. Well, I don't see the.
If you hover over the bottom of your window, of the Zoom window, you'll get a bar pops up which has your chat and your share screen options.
Okay. Yes, I got it. It's under more. That was it. Okay, right. So thanks everyone, and thank you for coming back. So we've got a relatively small group now. Most of us know each other, but therefore we'd give priority to anybody who is participating who is not in this group, like Veiko and Naran, who I didn't meet yet. What we want to do is use this time to reflect on the discussion you had and talk about the top points that were discussed in your group. We had two groups. So our group had a few points, and I guess your group had some. We'd like to hear those main points and reflect it back to how we might use adaptation technologies to improve national level climate action. So because I'm aware who was in my group already, maybe it'd be nice to hear from the other group. So Robert, in your group, can you either invite people or yourself share for them? But it'd be nice to hear from people who we've not met yet, who are part of this discussion, to share how the Ignite and the discussion has run ideas this has brought up.
Thanks, Chris. We agreed that Harrison will share some of the messages from our group.
Super.
Harrison, please.
Can I go ahead?
Please do so.
You can, and it's really nice to know that you're working in a real situation, so we can hear from all of you. Harrison, go ahead. Harrison, we can't hear you.
Harrison was saying that he might have troubles with the internet.
Harrison, is it okay? Can you?
Sorry, my connection dropped. Can I continue, Chris?
Yes, please continue.
Okay. So the first point that we have was the need to develop local institutions that take a lead in these issues. For example, in Kenya, there is county level funds that help in at keeping track of investments. Also, a possibility of working with intermediary organizations such as the Asian Development Bank that works with smaller organizations. So they basically manage smaller funds for more localized implementation. And then we also looked at the need for evidence, but both qualitative and quantitative evidence, and also not looking only at the conventional way of generating evidence, but also looking at an evolving approach that focuses more on the learning. And then the last point we talked about was around media, how sometimes the media might not help by focusing only on the negative perspectives. Therefore, there might be need to train the media on some of these issues so that they help in scaling up the things that work.
That's great. That's really great discussion, actually. Those all 3 points there. I hope that we can capture that, because as we said earlier, the purpose here is to show that this discussion is continuing and to try and feed these insights into the international processes, such as this Understanding Risk Forum and Development and Climate Days and the contacts they have. So we need to document these and maybe put them in a form that these messages get out and that we can ourselves innovate using these messages. So I think we need to capture them. Robert, you're about to come in, yes?
I am capturing, so I'm taking notes from the whole session, so they will be captured. Just wanted to add that to Harrison's excellent summary is that especially that the latest point emerged while Aditya was pointing out COVID-19 situation and the fact that this local level innovation that now we had this. Well, using the word opportunity with COVID is not that I'm very comfortable with, but there was an opportunity to see just how impressive, small scale, simple, ingenious innovation is across the countries, because the responses were very often localized, to take out the national lockdowns, etc.
Yep, thank you. Would anybody else in your group who I've not met, who intended, like to either through commenting in the chat box or unmuting and joining? I see Vico, and I don't know how to pronounce it because it sounds like two names combined. Bakish. But I'm inviting you to, if you want to comment, you can, by all means. We'd love to hear from you. So, and use the chat box, of course, if you are struggling with your connection or microphone. From our group then, I'd like to invite, that we had two really great points, and one built on the last one that you had about the media, and it was Anne's point about how we communicate, and I think that is really worth sharing. I don't know if Anne, would you be happy sharing it again for the wider group?
Sure, Chris. Yeah, well, I'm the marketing manager at IIED, and so I'm kind of aware of a lot of terminology that we use in development, and it just strikes me that so many of the things that we talk about in IIED's work are broadly the same thing, but there's a lot of different words to explain them. So we talk about adaptation technology, which is also community-based adaptation, which is also indigenous knowledge, and it kind of goes on. And I think our framing has to be something that captures the attention of funders, captures the attention of governments, makes it clear what it is that we're aiming to do, what that communities that are trying to get the finance are aiming to do, and how to get that across in a kind of coherent way. Yeah, that's basically it. We just need to use plain English or whatever the correct
say what it is
in the description, and be clear about what we're doing and what we want to say.
And I think that agroforestry, for example, is one example. You can talk about coffee agroforestry and we know what it is. We can talk about biodikes to prevent floods and we know what it is. Diverse or seed systems that use the diversity that farmers have so that it builds resilience. And there can be diversification in the farming system and in the agricultural system. It explains what it is. So I think that maybe the challenge to us is to kind of like get rid of these complicated terms, just like in other times, sometimes we hear people saying, don't use acronyms, say what it is. Really good point. In our group, we had another one, which I think was a really good point to capture, which was around Indigenous knowledge and innovation. The point I think was made by Nya. Nya, would you like to reiterate for the wider group what that is? Just, are you happy to do that?
Yes, so my point was about the innovation, the bottom-up innovation that we have found, and it resonates with what Anne just shared about the way that we frame them. In our programming and in our program implementation, so we have also been promoting different type of what you can call bottom-up innovation. But then the key challenges that we found in scaling up those type of innovation is how we can decide what would be the minimum standard or the what is the must-have in a single innovation or single models or intervention that we need to keep, and what the other part should be more flexible or adaptable that could really enable us to take it to a large scale. So that is something that we would need to consider, because sometimes it is too local based, and an innovation or a good practice that happen at a small scale level, which is really great, but then really challenging to scale up. So that is my point.
Yeah, and I think when we reflect on this session and we're writing up our takeaways, Nya, do give us some, do make sure we capture that properly and help us understand that point properly. I've made some notes, I hope I got it, but you can help us maybe with doing that. We're coming to this stage where, I mean, those were the two main conclusions I got from my group. I just want to ask, in my group, is there from Dharam or from Joseph, was there a point that you felt I've not captured that you would either want to make or?
Just to add, Chris, the trust on technologies, the technology that are in use at local level, they are good and autonomous type of adaptation. But for the upscaling and for raising increasing the investment, the trust always bar them. The policymaker, they do not trust. First, they do not recognize, and then second, if they recognize, okay, this is something technology that is in use, but there's a lack of trust whether to upscale, whether this work or not, and then that bar to mainstreaming or integration of technologies into the policy process. If that is not recognized by local policy or federal or provincial policy, then the technology never get financial investment, and then it that bar to upscale good technology, but it is not recognized.
That brings us in a circle back around to the challenge for the business case for investment with money. So really that trust point, let's use that word trust and business case and connect the two. Thank you, Dharam. Robert, your hand is up.
No, I just want to add some thoughts on we're talking a lot about upscaling in today's session, and also today and in the CBA in the adaptation technology team, we've heard a lot about indigenous knowledge, and we often think about how to upscale indigenous knowledge, and I would like to indigenous technologies, because I would like to challenge that a bit, and especially with reference to what Aditya was talking about, and differing worldview. So indigenous knowledge, its main strength is the fact that it's so local, it's embedded in the local social, political, economic context. And then if you're taking that, if we're thinking about a scale in how it's, how the mainstream sees it, then we run a threat of it losing this main strength it has. So I'm just like to point out that, when we talk about upscaling of indigenous adaptation technologies, this is something that we do need to be very careful about, because if we, in this process of upscaling, take it out of the context, we will lose its main strength.
Wow, yeah, that's a good one. Upscaling may take indigenous responses or indigenous innovation out of context and therefore lose its strength. I've written that down. Right. I think we're at the stage where we can use the next 5 minutes to wrap up, including thoughts. If there's no more feedback from the discussions or no more new points to add to the discussion, I think we can reflect on the whole session. And we've got, I did say I'd give each of the 5 speakers an opportunity to say, what's your reflection on this session? And I think one thing might be how we get more people into the room in this discussion. Shall we have a quick round and then close? I mean, I'd be happy to do that. It's a minute each. If you were to reflect on this session and how it can contribute to achieving its objectives.
Should I start? Or?
Yes, go. You start. Yes, that'd be grand.
Okay, thanks. Actually, sometimes the catchy word, like, we are talking about adaptation technologies, but still, there are different technologies that look similar to nature-based or locally adapted technology. So sometimes the catchy word attract the participants to the that is something. And second one is, I don't know, even I was confused while joining before I received this Zoom link, and then where to join. There are a number of sessions here and there. Then people, they are not actually habitual in general to go into the system, to go into the virtual means. So kind of, communication to the network, like, okay, this is the way, how to link, how to join, and this is the session, and something like the abstract that people can get access quickly. That makes session, get more participation.
I agree. I actually really struggled to find it in the agenda because you had to move across, and because I had a touch screen, that I was able to move the program across. We were on the right-hand side of a screen, and it was very hard to find our session.
Yeah.
Christine also failed to find it. Yes, I've learned a bit about that. Next person, anybody, any comment from Nya or Aditya?
Sure, Chris, I can go very quickly next. I think listening to the presentations and the discussions in the breakout group, one thing was clear to me, that the scale of the adaptation and risk reduction challenge is so immense that we're never going to make meaningful progress through just sort of top-down formal solutions. I think creating an enabling environment to engender these bottom-up solutions is really the key. We have to let 1,000 flowers bloom in order to make sure that some meaningful progress on making people more resilient comprehensively is made. So, and it's surprising that discussions of adaptation technology still are dominated by the infrastructure, formal engineering approaches to deal with risk, whereas you can put all the formal infrastructure in place that you want, there will still be a certain amount of risk that will be shouldered by poor communities. through the types of innovations that we've talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a partnership with CARE, Practical Action and IIED, I think we're all working on trying to break that, is it a paradigm? It's a habit to respond through formal infrastructure and top-down planning. Right, thanks, Aditi. Yeah, what about yourself? Any final reflections on this conversation and what we might do next?
Yeah, no, I think yeah, apart from what you just shared, I think from CAP perspective, I think how we can, in term when it comes to adaptation technologies, what we are keen is how we can take kinds of like human-centered design approach, or yeah, in other ways, how we can really ensure the voice of yeah, disadvantaged and vulnerable people are incorporated. For example, women. In CARE Vietnam, we mainly work with remote ethnic minority women. And also the pain point that we got from our weather model is that yeah, we work closely with them in multiple projects. It seems like we still don't really understand when it comes to their willingness to pay for products or services. And in this case, yeah, we call that adaptation technology. And in that sense, yeah, I think that there is still a gap, and we need to strengthen our approach and our ways of working in really understanding the needs of people. Yeah, in our case, when we do transmitting the climate information service in SMS and voice message for ethnic minority women, it didn't work.
I wanted to, I like the message. I was going to say this gap, to address this gap, perhaps it's more than understanding the needs, but what I think Aloe Weather seemed to show is understanding the abilities of people as well. So yeah, understanding the needs and understanding the abilities of people to use the technology, or
yeah, to uptake the technology.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm making a note of that. Who haven't I? Is Harrison and Maria Claudia, but I think Maria Claudia is not on the call. So it's Harrison.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm still on the call. Yeah, so the takeaway for me, I think, is around the evidence generation, really. That, you know, we need to look at an evolving approach rather than the conventional way of doing things. And also the need to work in a multi-stakeholder approach. I think we learned a lot from the media people. I think we thought they are the ones who needed training, but then the feedback from the marketing manager from my IED shows that sometimes it's the way we communicate. So I think those partnerships will be very useful.
Thank you, Harrison. A really insightful point. And I think, I hope Anne and Joseph and any others, but they've left, actually, they've dropped off now. But yeah, have confidence to bring your voice to this discussion, because I think you add a very valuable perspective to the scaling, and it's about effective communication. And we need to learn more about that as experts in this field. So I think we've heard from everybody who, I mean, I've been pushing and soliciting opinions. I'm happy that I've got a lot of feedback from people. We can end early. I want to thank Joe from Wellbank 7. Joe, I've forgotten your surname. Joe.
Thank you.
Joe Smile, was it? Joe, no.
It's Joe Light.
Joe Light, that's it, yes. Thank you, Joe, for helping us with the technical facilitation. You've enabled us to have a discussion, despite the fact that we haven't got 50, 60, 70 or hundreds of people, but we will use this discussion. I want to thank everybody who's put any effort into participating. We've got some good resources here. We're going to write it up. And the question is, this is part of a process. This is part of developing a narrative and learning lessons to connect the horizontal learning to the vertical, so that we have better programming and implementation of climate action. So from me, it's a big thank you to everybody. Unless anyone has something they'd like to add or say, I'm going to bring the meeting to a close.